Hey, as always, it's Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and thanks for joining us. Well, it's summertime, which means it's travel time throughout the state of Pennsylvania and also construction season. And we'll get into roads and bridges and what's going on there. But first, they get your money. I'm talking about scams, and we have a national expert that is going to tell you what they are and particularly what to do about them. And we'll get to that after these words.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
All right, my guest to begin the show is Brian Roche. He's the anchor and Consumer Investigator at WGAL-TV. Brian, you spend a good deal of your professional career looking at scams, and you have several that you want to talk to our viewers about that I think are important to them because of the ripoff that these scams are. So here's one that's pretty fascinating that you call the romance scam.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this before, Terry, but I wanted to talk about it again today because it is a rapidly growing, developing scam. Latest statistics that we saw last year, at least $1 billion reported in losses, and that figure is probably much higher than that because a lot of victims of romance scams, they're embarrassed. Once they realize they've been had.
So they don't want to talk about it.
They don't want to tell their family. They don't want to tell anyone around them because they're very, very embarrassed. And I have talked to a few of them recently. As a matter of fact, I've talked to a woman just last week. She lost $40,000. Another man who lost $168,000. But the losses keep multiplying. So back to that $1 billion figure, it's probably a lot higher than that because most of the time these scammers are getting widows, widowers, older people who are living alone. And those folks, once they get taken, they don't want to tell their family members about it because they're afraid that the family members might say, you can't be left on your own anymore. So we think a lot of the scam losses are unreported.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, there's also scams through smart TV. Well, before we get into what the scams are, what's smart TV for those folks who may not be aware?
Well, the smart TVs are, a lot of people have them, of course, now, and they're connected to the internet.
Right.
And scammers are finding ways to send these pop-up messages onto your TV screen, usually through the TV itself, or they can also attach them to these apps. Say you get Peacock TV or Netflix or Hulu or things like that. They're attaching them to these apps somehow. So when you get on there and you want to try to sign in, they're telling you that you're having a problem. So they say you've got to resubmit your information. And it may seem harmless at the time. It looks very similar to what you've done in the past, but you sign in there and you're giving up something. You're giving up personal information. You're giving up a credit card. You're giving up your address, something like that. That's little pieces of information that a scammer can get. They can then go and get the rest of your profile. They can look for you online and try to extrapolate more information.
Is this one growing?
Absolutely. It's a brand. Actually, it's relatively new. It's like in the last 3 or 4 months that they have started to do these. I've read that there is belief that it's coming from Southeast Asia, from the scam land, as we call it. India, Southeast Asia, Thailand, North Korea, China. We believe that's where these are coming from. But these are relatively new, yes.
And I'll tell you, with the social media out there, I get all kinds of material from people I don't know. And if I don't recognize the name, I just delete it.
That is the wisest thing you can do.
I mean, they may be legitimate, but you just don't know what you're getting into.
And people feel a sense of obligation to respond to these things. Oh, well, if they ask me a question, I guess I better respond to it. And I try to tell people more and more often, it's okay to say no. In fact, it's highly encouraged that you say no. If you're suspicious, you and I have, you and I are old school. Trust your gut. If your gut tells you that there's possibly something wrong here, most of the time, your gut's right.
Yeah.
It's telling you what to do.
But modern technology is a big help to the scammers.
Well, you hit the nail on the head there. Back to the romance scams, though, the technology that they have, one thing they're being very successful with, Terry, is using AI. if they're trying to approach you with a romance scam, they actually have gotten so good now that they can use AI, artificial intelligence, to make it appear as if I'm speaking to you live. I just read about a romance scam victim who thought she was speaking to Elon Musk, the owner of X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
And she thought she
Twitter
was
to me.
Yeah, she thought she was speaking to him, and this technology allows them to do this. And again, as long as we're back on romance scams, let me work in here that the scammers are using the technology to appear to be members of the military, and they're approaching victims and trying to prey on your sense of patriotism to the United States military and saying, hi, I'm here on assignment in Iraq or whatever, and I need money to get home. And they're using AI, that technology, to do that as well.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, how about text messages from strangers?
Yes.
We'll see what that's all about after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back. My guest is Brian Roche. He's anchor and consumer investigator at WGAL-TV. And we're chatting about a number of these very, very important scams that you need to be very careful about. All right, here's one, text messages from strangers.
Have you received on your phone lately a message from someone that just says, hi, or do you want to have dinner tomorrow night?
Absolutely, and you know what I do immediately?
Hopefully you delete them.
Hit the delete button.
But this is an emerging scam because what they're trying to do is draw you in and hoping that you're going to respond and say, who is this? Or I draw you into a conversation. And you know, it seems innocent at first, but once they start talking to you and getting to know a little bit about you, they then eventually try to work you toward investment scams, Bitcoin, digital currency. And this is growing rapidly. This has been evolving in the last 4 to 6 months since probably the beginning of the year. But I've had so many people, so many of my coworkers have said, hey, Brian, what is this text I'm getting? This person, I have no idea who they are.
I get them all the time.
Well, they're absolute strangers.
It's called delete.
Well, yes, it's very easy to delete, but hey, you know, you and I know the old phrase about curiosity and what it did to the cat. So a lot of people, their curiosity gets the better of them, and they click on there and they start these conversations, and they get drawn into these scams. Eventually, again, it leads to Bitcoin, or they want some kind of money, or they're trying to pitch some kind of investment scam.
All right, there's another important scam that you refer to as the computer pop-up scam, and the huge number of victims and the amount of money that they lost.
This has been around for a while, and this is where an ad pops up right in the middle of your computer screen, tells you that it may be from Microsoft or Apple Security or what have you, and they've detected a problem with your computer. Here's a phone number to call. Now, what's become dangerous about this, Terry, is that a growing number of senior citizens are falling for this. In fact, just recently in Lancaster County, we had a very sad case. The state police investigator reported to us of a couple that lost $74,000.
Oh my gosh.
They lost $30,000 in Bitcoin. They asked them to return the Bitcoin, and then they lost $44,000 in cash. Someone actually came to their door to pick up the box of cash. Here's what happens. They get you to respond. They tell you there's a problem with your computer. They work their way into your computer, and then they either try to get to your bank account or they lock the whole computer up and basically hold it for ransom. And they tell you that you need to pay money.
I'll tell you, if I have a problem with my computer, I pick it up and carry it to one of the specialists, you know, the stores.
And that's the right thing to do. But keep in mind, again, these victims that we just talked about were 70-some years old. And you mentioned earlier the technology and how it rapidly evolves. if you stop and think about our, say our iPhones, our smartphones, they're only about 15 years old. So someone who's older, they're not familiar with this technology, what to do with it, and how to handle it. So they fall, unfortunately, for these scams. They figure, okay, well, there's a problem with my computer, and I've got to call that phone number, and they fall right into these traps. But again, that case last week that we had of $74,000, it's very seldom that you get people in our newsroom to gasp. But that one, when we heard that dollar figure, that was pretty sad. And that one has been around for a while, but it continues to proliferate.
And I take it that senior citizens are more likely to get seduced by these people.
You are correct, but you'd be surprised. The next age group that really falls for these, it's 65 to 80 is the #1 age group. The next age group, 20 to 30-year-olds.
Oh, wow.
Because, look, I had some children in that age group. They think they're foolproof. They think they're bulletproof. They think nothing's going to happen to them. And they get on their phones and they get on their computers and do whatever they want. But that's surprisingly the second
All right,
group.
you have an assignment, and that is to keep us updated on these scams.
I work every day at it.
All right, great. All right, it's travel season in all over the country, but obviously in the state of Pennsylvania, and we're going to talk about roads and bridges. It's construction season, what to expect after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by
Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, welcome back. Well, as I indicated earlier in the promo, we're going to talk about roads and bridges. Travel is certainly very high in the state of Pennsylvania. Joining me to talk about that and roads and bridges with a whole bunch of aspects of Pennsylvania roads and bridges is Kim Maiolo. She is the Director of Communications with the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors. Kim, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
All right. Tell our viewers what is, or I should say, are the general conditions in Pennsylvania roads as we sit here and chat right now?
Sure. So, they could use a little bit of help. I'm not going to lie. As you know, we have a lot of bridges in Pennsylvania. We have over 25,000 bridges, and we're an old state. We have these beautiful mountains and rivers, and
it's complex, is what you're saying.
It's complex, and with the old state comes old infrastructure. We have a freeze-thaw cycle that's really unkind to our infrastructure. And the average age of our bridges across the state is 55.
Yeah, well, I want to get into some of those in a minute.
Yeah.
In a minute. Keep going.
Yeah. So just to give you an idea, though, the intended life of those bridges when they were built was 50. So we're over that at this point.
Okay.
Yeah. As far as our roads, we have a lot of rural roads in particular that need attention, and those roads are not eligible for the federal funding that we saw come across a couple years ago, the IIJ.
One of the things that strikes me is how complex Pennsylvania is geographically. I mean, we have mountainous regions, mountainous and forest regions. We have urban areas. We have suburban areas. I mean, we have a very large, complex state. And there's another aspect to this. People who are traveling from out in the Midwest, if they want to go up into come into the east, particularly up in the Northeast, guess what state they go through? And similarly, if people are up in the Northeast and they want to go out into the Midwest or even to the South, guess what state they travel through?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely a complex system, and we have that sort of mix of urban areas. We have the rural areas. There's a lot of different transportation needs and different modes, and again, with that comes those funding needs that we'll talk about here in a little bit, I think. But for sure, it's definitely a complex state and in need of some additional funding.
Yeah. Well, look, let's run to a break and we come back. Let's talk about funding needs, funding solutions, and then I definitely want to get to something you mentioned earlier, which is bid problems. Back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania American Water. We keep life flowing across the Keystone State.
Welcome back. Well, we're talking about a very important subject to us all. That's the condition of Pennsylvania's roads and bridges, which we all travel on. My guest is Kim Maiolo. She is Director of Communications with the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors. All right. We talked about the general conditions. Let's now talking about the solutions that are required in terms of the funding to keep our roads and bridges in good shape.
Right. And, you know, Terry, as you're aware, there's a lot of different modes of transportation. APC is involved in a coalition called the Keystone Transportation Funding Coalition. And it's a really broad-based group of transportation advocates that have come together. They were really instrumental in the passing of Act 89 over a decade ago, the last major funding package we saw. And they've kind of reconvened a working group to talk about these issues and solutions and what can be done without raising taxes, most importantly, because really it's politically.
Yeah. But it seems to me that ought to be, I mean, depending on what you want to do with the money, but overall, the general notion of funding roads and bridge construction and repair work seems something that ought to build consensus.
Absolutely, and you would think so, but anytime you hear the word taxes, people kind of recoil, right? So we're trying to be a little bit creative in the solutions that we're looking for to fix these issues, and also go hand in hand with what the governor has proposed, which is a transit funding, a rather robust increase in transit funding. So we want to complement his plan with something that would also support the other modes. And what that would look like from our perspective would be a bond financing program that we could pay back with a revenue stream that's increasing, and that's sales tax on motor vehicles. We've seen that grow historically $60 million a year. So that would allow us to do about $1 billion a year in additional capital improvement projects.
All right. We also have, and you mentioned this earlier, but let's get into some detail about bridges and the bridge problem.
Yeah. So recently, an organization.
Do you know how many bridges we have?
We have over 25,000 bridges.
25,000.
Yes, it's a lot of bridges.
I'll say.
And unfortunately, a lot of those bridges are in poor condition. And what we've learned from a recent study by TRIP, it's an organization based out of DC, a research group, is that about 13% of those bridges right now are in poor condition. That leaves us in about 6th place nationally. Now that is an improvement, the good news. The good news is it's an improvement from what we saw in 2013 when the last billing package was approved. We see that when money is infused into our bridge program, it happens. We see improvements. It used to be back in 2013, 23%, which was the highest in the country. We were leading in an area we didn't want to lead, right? So we've seen improvements. However, if we continue at our current rate, we're going to slide back. It's just inevitable. But as we are right now, according to TRIP, about 10 million.
What's TRIP?
It's an independent. It's the Road Information Program is what it stands for, and it's an independent study group. But over 10 million vehicles drive over bridges that are in poor condition every day in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Oh my. I mean, that's unbelievable.
Kind of a staggering statistic.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I'm shocked at the number of bridges. Literally, the number. I shouldn't be because I drive a lot and I drive over all these bridges. And you can drive over them and see just literally without being an expert that they're in need of repair.
Oh yeah, for sure. And you know, we're seeing issues like inflation that really haven't helped. You know, we've seen a 69% increase in construction costs since 2021. So we're fighting a few different areas here.
What organizations do you work with on your program?
So with the Keystone Transportation Funding Coalition, we're looking at not only folks that are in, you know, other transportation modes like transit and rail. We have bike and pedestrian. We have the business community, so local chambers of commerce. We have healthcare groups. We have military readiness organizations. We have agriculture. It's really, really broad-based. So, you know, when you have all these different voices coming from different areas saying this is important to us, we tend to get a little bit more traction. And
do you call this a working coalition that, you know, you've got to go to the legislature, you got to go to, obviously, Governor Shapiro, you have Democrats and Republicans. Yeah. That all gets complicated.
Yeah, so it's a group that has, you know, a lot of different interests, but they all sort of rally around this idea that comprehensive transportation funding is important to the state of Pennsylvania. And they're out there and they're talking to the legislature and to lawmakers, and we're getting positive feedback.
Oh, that's good.
So, yeah.
And you say that financing bonds is a better way than a fuel tax?
Well, it's a more creative way to.
I like that. I like that word,
to
creative.
Find some funding, and it's anytime you find a more creative way that doesn't involve a tax increase, it's going to be probably a little bit more attractive, and that's proven correct to us in the conversations that we've had.
Yeah. But overall, you have a broad coalition that assists you because of all the groups that are involved in shipping, transporting items as well as people across the state, right?
Yeah. I mean, transportation touches every corner of our community, whether you're in a rural area or you're in, you know, one of our population centers. There's an aspect that affects everybody, and it affects the business community. Obviously, getting our folks to schools and to hospitals and to wherever they need to be safely and efficiently. It's an important topic.
And here's something that you point out, and there are local bridges in addition, and so the funding has to be divided between. It's a state-owned versus local. Is that the way to describe it?
Yeah. So. This particular proposal, the way that $1 billion, we would suggest that being allocated, the bulk of it would really go toward the state-owned bridge program, but there's also those locally owned bridges that the local governments can't afford to fix. So, you know, a good amount would go toward that as well. We would be seeing some money going toward DCED. So there's projects that also need aspects like access roads or interchanges we would see that money go toward other multimodal projects. We have a lot of airports that aren't just the main larger airports, but smaller.
Look, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and always stay well.